Purely
Well,
entertainment.
hello. Welcome. My name's Colin. Welcome to episode 8 of Roll by Roll's Tavern Talk, a show where we, the Roll by Roll gang, discuss various aspects of running a great D&D campaign based on our experiences with D&D 5e and our current adventures in Emathan homebrew campaign. So joining me tonight, as always, is the rest of the Roll by Roll crew. So we have Barry, who plays Nightingale and Landis.
Hey
Say hello.
everybody. Hey guys.
And we have Egan, who plays Douglin and Lafferty. Now you can talk, Egan.
Hello.
You master of timing, that guy.
Absolutely. So with that,
Which we'll
let's
get
get
into
right.
in a minute, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll get right into our topic here. So it's generally accepted in D&D that there's sort of three pillars: role play, combat, and exploration. Our group leans very heavily into role playing in our sessions. um, quite frankly, we'll often go entire sessions with role play only. um, and so that'll be no combat, no exploration, and some nights, very few times will we even roll the old math rocks. I think we had a session not too long ago where there were like two skill checks during the 4 hour session. So being a role play heavy group, we've learned some tips and tricks that help to ensure that everyone gets their chance to be in the spotlight, their chance to say their two bits worth. And so this requires everyone else, including myself, the DM, to share the stage. So, with that in mind, we thought tonight we would discuss role play and sharing the stage with other players. So, the first point, sort of talking point for the night, guys, I thought we'd get into is, what is role play in D&D, and is it necessary? Egan, it's your week to start.
Yeah, I think the first thing to ask is what is role playing and its place in Dungeons and Dragons. Obviously, the RPG role playing game, it's a big part of it. The way I look at it is a way to advance your story. The dice tell one story, the DM tells another, but really the players are, at least for us, we love to immerse ourselves into our characters, and through that role playing is how we reflect our growth, our advancement, and how we advance the story itself. um, I as we were talking about, value role playing is a tremendous part of the game. In fact, more important even than some of the other factors when it comes down to it. Because again, I'm trying to become my character, at least for those 3 hours or 4 hours every Saturday night that we do. So that's how I look at role playing, and I think it's a tremendously important part of the game.
Yeah. Barry, thoughts?
So there's a couple elements I feel are a part of role playing. And one of them, like Egan is expressing, is stepping into the shoes of your character and making decisions based as your character. Not the decisions me as a player would make. I might want to do this, but as my character, what kind of decisions? I play Nightingale, who's a rogue, who has a bit of a darker, more, less on the up and up background. So he's going to make decisions that will be different than Landis. So part of it's putting yourself in your character's shoes and making decisions based on what your character would, not you as a player. Other elements are mannerisms you can introduce, such as maybe you like using really fancy words like Lafferty, or really scientific explanations, or perhaps you're from a particular region of the world, so you're going to throw in a bit of an accent. Now, I know not everybody can do accents, and if you can't, there's other ways to kind of get around that, but the whole role play element is for you to forget about who you are as the player. I'm no longer Barry in our sessions. I am Nightingale and Landis. So I've got to think about that when I'm making decisions. I got to think about that when I'm doing interactions between players and non-player characters. And it's all of that encompassed is what to me role play is all about. And yeah, it's definitely something we all lean heavily into.
Yeah, I'm just going to read sort of a. This is out of the old Wikipedia, but I think for somebody who's really unfamiliar with role playing, the definition it gives here is a role playing game, and hence role playing, is a game in which the participants assume the roles of characters and collaboratively create stories. Participants determine the actions of their characters based on their characteristics, and the actions succeed or fail according to formal system of rules and guidelines. So, it's really where you're jumping into your character, sort of what both of you are talking about there. You're doing your best to become that character and talk and make decisions that character would make in the moment, not necessarily what the player would make in that particular moment. And you know the amount of depth you get in terms of the role playing, like we talked about, if you're really uncomfortable with role playing, maybe you just describe what your character said and how they said it or delivered it. And like for our group, we love making fools of ourselves, so we dive right into every role, and we have the voices and the actions and all of that, to really play up the role play. I think the way we do role play definitely um, can give you the most fun if role playing is a big part of your game. But we know lots of people, role playing may be not their biggest pillar in their game, right? Maybe it's combat, maybe it's exploration, and role playing is a little less. So, next question for you two fine gentlemen: do you need to do funny voices and an accent to play to do role playing? Egan?
Definitely.
It depends. You can do the funny voices if you so desire. I think this goes back to what you said. Some have no fear of making fools of themselves, which I am doing right now. Others have a tremendous fear about it. It's okay. There is no right or wrong way, in my humble opinion. However, I will say this, that I do think, especially on the DM's point of view, sometimes having a little bit of difference between one voice and another makes it a lot easier for the players to understand who they are interacting with. Yes, I do. I enjoy accents. I actually try to base my characters on the accent and vice versa. It's a package deal for them. Some sort of work, some don't. I don't care. I give it a shot and I go with it. And I will say I'm not a professional voice actor. Sometimes I lose it while I'm talking and I become, instead of Irish, I become, I don't know, South African or something. But it still stands that for me, it helps me get into that character. Lafferty doesn't have an accent. He speaks in a funny way. He speaks in, to what Barry was saying, is like he has a way of speaking. It's not an accent. It's the mannerisms. It's the
Yes.
droning on sort of sentences that he portrays because that's who he is. But we talk about it. There's no one way or one right way to do this. For us, at least accents are part of it. I enjoy it, and it helps me get into character, if you will.
Yep. Barry?
Yeah, you hit on what I was gonna kind of talk about here. Is you don't always need to have an accent, like a modern cultural accent. You could talk slower. You can talk faster. You can use bigger words. You can use simpler words. All of these are techniques and ways that you can distinguish your character. You know, when I speak with Landis, Landis is very monotone and speaks slower than Nightingale does. Nightingale's always very quick with what he's saying, and oh my god, this, that, when he's Nightingale. When he's other characters, he's got a different speech pattern. But Landis is always very calm, very monotone. Thank you very much. My friend isn't operating the way he should be today. That's just how I try to distinguish it. I couldn't come up with a voice for Landis, so I'm like, okay, let's try it with a method of speaking that I normally don't speak. I normally talk fairly fast, so it's quite a. I actually have to write notes that say slow down when I talk with Landis because I'll quickly begin to just fire it off and talk faster. But you could even, if you're not someone who's comfortable doing elements like that, you can just say to your group, my character when he talks is kind of bumbly with words, and he speaks fast and will sometimes use the wrong words in place of other words. So describe it to your friends before you start to talk, and they'll get the gist of it. It's whatever you're comfortable with. As a group, we always like to push each other in our boundaries. Just to relate a story back in the past when Egan first started the group, Colin and I thought it'd be really great, and a few of the other players we had in that particular game, if our bard, who Egan was playing at the time, did a song. And this was like, I think, what, 2-3 weeks into it, Egan? It wasn't very long at all.
No,
when we made him, and he didn't sing the song, but he wrote it out in a text and gave it to us, and like that's all it takes is, don't be afraid. Make sure that the group you're in, you're comfortable with, and you'd be surprised what you'll come up with.
Yeah. So I'm going to kind of jump back to a little something, Egan, that you said. I think for a DM, you don't need, need to be a voice actor. I think that's a simple way to put it. But it does help your characters understand who they're dealing with of the many NPCs that a DM can play in a single session. If you do change up your voice as much as possible from one NPC to another, because we've talked about it. We've had DM situations where the DM really spoke the same all night long, regardless of whether they were describing something, speaking as a man, speaking as a woman, speaking as a monster. You never really could tell who it was. Like, is that description, or did they say that? Or, so I think, to go back to what you talked about, Barry, you don't have to have a funny voice or, a great accent or anything. Maybe the way you deliver it, even just changing your voice slightly, like if you could just talk a little bit softer, then, maybe your party gets to know, okay, that's that one character, and it just helps them figure out who they're interacting with, right?
And
So,
worst case scenario, sorry, just add one more thing onto this. Worst case scenario, if you're a DM and you're just completely 100% against doing any type of voice modulation work, get into the habit of describing the person to your group who's about to speak.
yeah.
So Randolph walks up to the group and he runs his fingers over his eyebrows and then he talks. So then the group knows who is talking. You just have to get into that habit to make sure walking into the room is a fine young lady and she says this. That way you're kind of telegraphing to your group who's about to speak so that you don't get that confusion. It's just a simple way to get around not having any type of creativity with your voice.
Yeah.
Think of yourself as an author, right?
Yeah.
When you read
exactly.
a book, you obviously can't hear anything, so the author needs to let you know who is speaking and in what tone. Are they yelling? Are they happy? Are they sad? Do they, not believe you? Those sorts of things.
But the question is, when you read a book, do you make up names for the characters or make up voices for the characters yourself?
100%.
I do.
100%. Absolutely.
All right. So, yeah, and you know what? I'm going to throw in, we could maybe talk about this later or whatever, but I heard in a podcast some time ago, they were talking about using voices and that sort of thing. And they said, you know what? When you're driving in your car by yourself, practice. practice voices. Just try them out. There's nobody there but you to hear it if it sounds terrible, and just keep working at it, and you'll be able to do voices. When you hear a voice, try and mimic it in some way, and see if you can develop some voices that way.
Yep.
So now getting into the sharing the stage part of role playing, which, I mean, all the fantastic voices and accents that you have prepared are no good to you if you never get an opportunity to talk in your session. So Egan, what do you do to share the stage with other players?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start by saying that not everybody at a table. Now we have a smaller table right now with everybody that wants to talk. So it's a great problem to have. But I think we've all been around tables where, if it's larger, there might be one or two that just they don't engage as much. And that's okay too. Again, there's no right or wrong way with this, but when we do have sessions here, like maybe a new player is being introduced to the game or whatnot, I just think of a conversation like at a cocktail party. And if you're standing around a group of 3 or 4 people and one hasn't spoken in a while, ask them, like, have a question for them that allows them to engage. It could be something that doesn't even mean anything towards the plot, just like, oh, when did you ride in? How was the travel? Did you meet bandits along the road? Just something to engage them, to make sure that they're part of it. And oftentimes that will be all that's needed. And now they're part of it, and the flow of conversation can go from there. So yeah, just I tried at least to engage them and find a topic that they might be comfortable in answering.
Yeah, Barry?
Yeah, I'd have to agree with Egan. He's knocking it out of the park this night. Holy smokes, buddy. Yeah, tips for players is ask open-ended questions. So if I'm going to ask another player a question, it's never going to be a yes or no question. It's going to be, what's your opinion on this? What are your plans on this? How do you think we should do this? That draws them out, and they have to respond bigger than a yes, no, I don't know kind of answer. So that's the way to do it. But it's also, you got to really pay attention and know the people at your table. Like if you have a player who is a shyer player, you putting them on the spot all night long, asking them to talk isn't going to help. But if, say, at key moments in that night's campaign, you ask them questions, you don't push too hard, but you give them a chance to give something back, and then you just go with whatever they say, you're going to encourage that more and more and more. You really got to know the people at your table, because sometimes if you have an introvert who likes to be a part of the story but doesn't want to be a front runner, you putting the spotlight on them a bunch of times thinking that they're not having a good time is actually going to ruin their evening. But getting to know them and getting to feel them out, and this all happens over time with what you play. Even taking notes for yourself, like, oh, so and so is a bit quieter at our table, so wait for key moments in the game to ask questions to them. Don't just have idle chit chat, because they don't really like that. They want to contribute when it's time, but otherwise, they want to sit back. That's a helpful tip you could have. Like Egan said, at our table, everybody likes to share the spotlight. And, I think at some points we've got 3 spotlights on the go at the same time. We don't have a problem. Like, you can throw anything out, and if you watch our game, we will grab it, run with it with no problems. But that's just our particular table. So just get to know your table, get to figure out people's boundaries. Don't be afraid to push boundaries with players. Sometimes it's just what they need to do it, but sometimes people just don't want to be sharing the spotlight. So you got to appreciate that and understand that. And like I said, just ask them questions at key moments so that they feel a part of the big decisions. And then the rest of the time, they're that brooding rogue in the shadows, just watching the party do shit.
Can I make another point real quick, Colin?
Yeah, it'll cost you a little more than
you're taking them all tonight, man.
I'm taking the spotlight. Oh my God. I just wanted to also mention something along the lines of, like, like any new relationship, our sessions started awkward. I didn't know Nightingale. Douglin didn't know himself.
Oh,
We had a few other characters but like anything, we now have gotten to a point or getting better and better where the dialogue is second nature. Kind of like in real life, when you have a person that you just met, you sort of, talk about the weather. But now I know Nightingale, or I should say, Lafferty knows Nightingale and Landis. So the dialogue becomes more and more natural. So, that's the fun part too. Watch the progression go from very awkward, very superficial type of things to, hey, we got to go get that bad guy for you, and all that stuff. So I just wanted to mention that too, that it gets more natural and
give it
easier,
time.
and
Yeah.
that leads to more fun interaction. Yeah, I just wanted to mention that.
No, and it's a really good point because it 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 could be possible that you've got a new group, you get together, the and I'm sort of looking at this from a DM standpoint where um, the role playing is very um, awkward and difficult for the group, right? And you just need to realize as a DM, everybody is just feeling each other out and figuring out the conversations. And after a while, like you said, Egan, the characters start to know each other and have a lot more to actually talk about all the time, which really leans into more role playing, right? Um, for myself as a DM, with this group in particular, I've had sessions where I've literally just sat back and I was joking before we went live here. I'm just like, hey boys, just text me when you're done. Let just because you guys are just rolling with a big conversation about something, and there's no a DM might start to get the feeling they're losing control of the session, but you need to, you need to just let it go. Let that group roll with it. If they want to have, if you've got a 4 hour long session and they want to have a 4 hour long chat about the goings on of their downtime, let them go. We have one goal in this, and that's to have fun, right? And if that is what the group is having fun doing, then as a DM, you just have to feel comfortable letting go of the reins and just saying, "Hey, I'll just grab back onto those whenever you guys are done." This is awesome, and you guys have had some fantastic discussions that have added a ton to the game. Whatever that particular topic was, um, it just built all kinds of story from the discussion you were having.
You're letting out a DM secret. When you don't know what to do, just listen to what the players think is happening.
Hey, that's one of the what's the old joke? We Mr. DM, is that dragon in that cave over there? And I'm like, he wasn't before, but is now. Right? I mean,
Yeah,
yeah, absolutely. Listen to your group; they'll tell you what it is they're
looking for.
looking for. Yep. Now we touched on this a little bit, but just see if there's any specific tips you might have. What do you do if you realize a player is getting shut out? And I'm going to elaborate on this a little bit. I mean, the spotlight shifts in a session, right? One particular character, there may be a lot more focus on there. So, what do you do? What do you do as that player when you start to realize the spotlight has been on you for a while? What do you do to bring the rest of the players in? And also think of it from the aspect of, if you're one of the players that's been letting the spotlight, what do you do to re-engage with it? Anything you can think of. Egan?
Well, I think early on in Adventures of Emathan, Douglin was kind of the center. We sort of had to flesh out his backstory. It seemed kind of like what got everybody going. And I think I even commented on that, like, wow, I feel like I'm the only one that is, I don't want to say talking, but it seemed like I was, or Douglas was the center of attention. And, since I'm doing this because I want to be around people and engaging with people, at a certain point, I would try to just say, hey, Nightingale or Barry, what do you think about this? Or, try to do something going back to engaging like a new player. This was also to sort of take the spotlight, even though it's his backstory that we're kind of working on. Your teammates are basically a huge part of that, right? You're not getting anything done by yourself. So how do you bring them along? Like, hey, I'm going to need your help. And I know Nightingale did that with Douglin about his backstory, and that's how they became, I think tighter. They're becoming, developing a better friendship in the game. But yeah, it can, like, even for a guy who loves role playing, it can get like, okay, guys, I need someone else to start talking now. I feel like I'm the only one talking, and you want to make sure that everybody's enjoying themselves.
Barry.
I have an example from our prior campaign, the Sword Coast 6. I had a character who was kind of always in the background. It was Dane. And, I was kind of struggling what to do with him. And we had a face of the group, Silk, who was, totally always the guy talking and this and that. So I took it on myself to make Dane a part of Silk's decision making process. Being a cleric, I had a fairly high wisdom, so I had a really great insight. And I made it a point to always give my insight on the way the conversations were going and people were acting. So even though Silk was the face of the group, he became very dependent on what Dane had to say. And that was something I took on my own initiative to make sure I made myself a part of what was always going on. So you gotta, as a player, you really got to think about your value to your group and how you can add to things. Everybody has a different skill set. Everybody has a different, you know, things they want to focus on. So you got to look at who's in charge or who's in the spotlight at this moment. Like Douglin, you were in the spotlight for a while. Your backstory was kind of up front and center because of just the way it played out. We're not going to leave Maggie lost. It's your daughter, right? So we can't ignore that for too long. So it became the story that we all focused on. So how am I as a player? I could be all grumpy that the story's not about me, or I can say, okay, well, how can my characters facilitate Douglin's story? Because I know once his story's done, it'll probably blend into my story. Like we're lucky, Colin, in the way that you DM, even though we have a front and center story, all the rest of the stories are still getting little bits of information tossed in here and there so that they stay bubbling, simmering away until it's time to, crank up the heat on that story and we take off with it. So a lot of the onus, I think players need to, you need to take ownership of your characters. You need to take ownership of your game and make sure you're being as involved, if not the front and center, as involved as everybody else. Don't expect anybody else to make sure you're getting involved or you're putting all of your hopes and dreams of having a great session in other people's hands. Take it on yourself to figure out how your character can contribute to that main story, whether it's about you or not. So Nightingale was all about, like for Nightingale, he's never been a part of anything good. His whole past was, he was a thief, he was part of a guild, he was a con artist. So he was constantly doing stuff that was just, underhanded, deceiving people. And then he meets Douglin, who's this righteous individual, and he's now getting a chance to be a part of something good. So I was like, that's what will draw him into the conversation. Is he always wants to know what Douglin's next plan is because that's the good guy. I'm now the sidekick to the good guy, and it was very exciting to play it that way. So he would follow Douglin in to do anything, and I took that initiative to make sure that my character was a part of it, not competing for the spotlight because it's Douglin's story. Sometimes you got to step back and say, it's somebody else's turn, but not leaving it to either the DM to make sure I'm being involved, or, you know, even though our group does it all the time, I'm not going to rely on Egan to make sure that my characters are involved either. Sometimes we'll let each other get to that point where you're like, and Douglas, what do you think? Because you're just like, oh my God, guys, you're going to let me talk for 40 minutes straight with an NPC? Like, I think we intentionally do it to each other sometimes just to see how far we're going to run with it. But no, my best tip for anybody is don't rely on anybody else to involve you in that story. You take charge of your own game. You make sure you're having a good time, and you find out a way that you can support that story, be involved in that story, and have a great time at it.
Yeah, as a DM, and you sort of touched on within NPCs, the DM generally has the in my mind one of the easiest ways to pull people around the role play, because I can move NPCs in and out of the conversation as it's sort of, if I see someone is maybe sitting on the outside of this conversation, even if the play, because sometimes as a player you're wrapped up in what's going on, and it gives the DM does have the opportunity to have an NPC pull the other characters in some way, right? So, but I like what you're saying there, Barry, where as a player, don't rely on the DM or the rest of the group to pull you into the role play. Pull yourself in there. You'll have lots of opportunity, right?
Yeah.
So what a surprise, guys. We have rolled right up onto a half hour here.
Actually, before we wrap, I got one question for you as a DM, and I
All
like I
right.
like putting you on the spot here because you got two players and one DM. How do you balance the spotlight when the party gets split?
Uh that's a great point. So for myself, I mean, we've talked about it already. So generally we have somewhere that the spotlight at the point that the party splits, somewhere that the spotlight has been focused, because I mean that's generally the way any session is going. The spotlight is moving around to various people as they're involved in role play or whatever it is. So, in trying to find a good balance, so the party splits, I always look at it in terms of the majority of the focus is going to go where the big part of the plot is rolling for this session right now. But I want to make sure that the other characters that are in other places doing other things continue to get their opportunity. So we'll use the end of last session, where towards the end of the session the main plot point was um, Corey Fairbanks had Newland, who's a doom, trying to find these tunnels. But then I had Lieutenant Arden and Landis were sort of separated from Douglin and Maggie and Anton. So we spent a little more time there, and then I went back to Lieutenant Arden and Lafferty and Landis and their decision to go and find them. And once that was sort of resolved, that gave me an opportunity. Now we'll go back and give Douglin and Maggie the moment that we were waiting for, sort of in this session, where they'd have their chance to have their first talk. And um, I just I try and get because in that situation it would be very easy just to say, well, the big plot point right at the moment is Corey Fairbanks trying to find these tunnels with Newland, right? But if you're not careful, that could have excluded everyone but one character, right? The amount of time you give each person, you try and wrap it up, in a logical point to move on to the other group, and what are you doing. So I don't think there's a magic formula to it, But what helps guide me is what's our major plot point that we're involved in, and then the other groups separate out from that, right? So
Is it like with each individual story that's going on, you're waiting for particular like landmarks to get hit, and then you can stop it at that point.
Or
yeah,
cues or
yeah.
whatever.
You
Yeah.
want to sort of reach a resolution point where everybody isn't going, but wait, what happened? But you can only let it go on so long. So you just try
Yeah.
and find a good point to hit the pause button and then move on to one of the other groups, right? So
Cool, man. Cool. I think that'll be helpful to DMs out
yeah,
there.
it's like so many things with D&D. It is not a perfect art, but you know. All right, so yeah, we're going a little OT tonight, but that's okay. Any last thoughts around role playing and sharing the stage, Egan?
Drop some gold, buddy.
Well, no, I would just say to those out there reluctant, find a table and put yourself out there. I think you will be rewarded more than you can imagine. It also it helps with so many other things, even in life, right? Like just try stuff, have fun with it. This is a fantasy game that allows us to be somebody else, and there is nothing wrong with trying things, accents, whatever. I say everything you're comfortable with, but try to get out of your comfort zone.
Yeah,
I think you're going to be happy with it.
yeah, absolutely. Barry, closing thoughts?
Role play is more than just funny voices and that kind of stuff. So you figure out a way to distinguish who your character is in whatever way, shape, or form, and make sure you're making the choices your character will make, and you're role playing.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I, for myself, I role role playing is one of the biggest attractions of role playing games for us, in particular Dungeons and Dragons. I mean, I think it's one of the reasons I love being a DM so much, is I get to be so many people in a night. It's so much fun. And I don't care if I make an ass of myself. Try a voice and it doesn't work, or try to be act a certain way, it doesn't work. Whatever. I realize now that won't work. And I'll try something else next time. And it's to me, it's all a lot of fun. And I think, Egan, to what you said, you just try it. You know, if it doesn't go great, try something else. If you're just getting in a group and you're just trying to figure out, you try a voice and you realize, God, by 30 minutes into the session, I can't even talk anymore.
Yeah.
Dwarves. We'll just go with dwarves.
Dwarves.
Yeah. All right, so we better put a wrap on episode 8 of Roll by Roll's Tavern Talk. So we hope that you've enjoyed tonight's topic and maybe learned a thing or two that you can bring back to your table. Tavern Talks occur the Thursday after each of our Saturday night adventures in Emathan sessions. So our next session is scheduled for October 29th, Saturday, October 29th. So no session this Saturday. For those of you watching on YouTube, please support us by making sure you like our videos and subscribe to the channel. Hit that little bell icon if you want to be alerted when our next session occurs. So, gentlemen, as we always do at the end of each Tavern Talk, we'll have a little cheers to everyone. Thank you for joining us. And
May the
we
dice
hope you can
forever
join
be
us.
in your favor.
Yes.
We hope you can join us next time. Cheers.